Blackmail? The Italian's face went purple. Elena, holding a water pitcher, almost dropped it. One wrong word and $1 billion deal, Sterling's lifeline, implodes. He roared something guttural in Venetian, and the translator, Chad, just stood there, sweating. A disaster, brewing fast. But here's the thing. They all underestimated the waitress, didn't they? See, Elna knew that dialect, knew the venom behind it. She also knew Old Man Sterling was being played. They think she's just some girl refilling glasses. They have no idea how her quiet kindness and a secret buried in Venice will change everything. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. The hired translator was sweating through his suit, stuttering nonsense. The deal was dead. The room was silent, save for the terrifying sound of a chair scraping back as the Italian magnate stood up to leave. And then, from the shadows near the kitchen door, a soft, perfect voice cut through the tension. It wasn't a diplomat. It wasn't an executive. It was the girl holding the water pitcher. And she wasn't just speaking Italian. She was speaking the dialect of the Venetian aristocracy. The shoes were the worst part. They were a half size, too small. Cheap black rubber meant to be non-slip. But after 10 hours on the marble floors of the Gilded Lily, they felt like iron vices crushing the bones of Elena Cross's feet. Elena adjusted her apron, tucking a stray lock of chestnut hair behind her ear. She checked her reflection in the polished brass of the espresso machine. She looked tired. At 26, she had the eyes of someone who had lived 3 different lives, none of them easy. "Cross, what are you doing admiring yourself?" The voice cracked like a whip. Elena didn't flinch. She was used to it. She turned to face Marcus Thorne, the floor manager. Marcus was a petty tyrant in a 3-piece suit, a man who believed that abusing the staff was a necessary display of power. He had a face that was handsome until he smiled, which revealed a cruelty that made the busboys tremble. Just checking the espresso pressure. "Marcus, Table 7 complained about the Cremere last time." Clear's throat. Elena said, her voice calm. "Table 7 is empty," Marcus snapped, stepping into her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and stale cigarettes. "And tonight you are not to be seen, and you are certainly not to be heard. Do you understand? We have the Sterling party coming in. The entire restaurant has been bought out." Elena looked down at her tray. "I understand. Water and bread service only." No eye contact. Arthur Sterling is 82 years old. Marcus lectured, fixing his cufflinks. "He is the most powerful industrialist in New York. He is meeting with Giovanni Moretti from the Venetian shipping conglomerate. If this merger happens, the Gilded Lily becomes the go-to spot for the billionaire class. If it fails because a clumsy waitress drops a fork, I will ensure you never work in this city again. Not even at a hot dog stand." Elena nodded. "I'll be invisible, Marcus." "Good, because I hired a top-tier translator. A specialist. I don't want you hovering. Fill the glasses and vanish." Marcus stormed off toward the hostess stand, barking orders at the sommelier. Elena let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She picked up the heavy crystal water pitcher. She knew who Arthur Sterling was. Everyone did. He was the man who built the steel skeletons of half the skyscrapers in Chicago and New York. But she also knew who Giovanni Moretti was. That was a name from a life she had tried very hard to bury. Elena walked out onto the floor. The restaurant was breathtaking. High ceilings painted with Renaissance fresco, velvet curtains the color of blood wine, and tables set with silver that cost more than Elena's yearly rent. Tonight, however, the atmosphere was different. It wasn't just luxury, it was tension. Security guards with earpieces stood at the perimeter. The kitchen staff was terrified. The chef, a volatile Frenchman named Pierre, was currently screaming about the temperature of the Rotto. Elena moved to her station, the shadow station. Her job tonight was humiliatingly simple. Keep the water glasses full, replace the bread and clear plates only when signaled. She was to be a ghost. She watched as the doors opened. The wind from the street seemed to suck the air out of the room. Arthur Sterling entered first. He walked with a cane, but he didn't lean on it. He used it like a weapon, tapping it rhythmically against the floor. He was an old lion. His mane of white hair swept back his face, etched with deep lines of stress and authority. He wore a suit that looked like it was cut from midnight itself. Behind him trailed a nervous entourage of assistants holding binders labeled Project Aurora, the private code name for the merger. Then came the Italians. Giovanni Moretti was younger, perhaps in his late 50s, with olive skin and eyes that scanned the room like a predator assessing a trap. He was flanked by two severe-looking men and a woman who looked like she was calculating the net worth of the furniture. And finally, the translator Marcus had hired. He was a young man, maybe 25, wearing a suit that was too shiny. He looked confident, perhaps too confident. Elena recognized him vaguely. His name was Chad, and he was the nephew of one of the restaurant's investors. Rumor had it he had spent a semester in Florence and claimed to be fluent. Elena felt a knot form in her stomach. Semester in Florence, she thought against Giovanni Moretti. Giovanni was not from Florence. He was Venetian from an old, proud lineage that spoke a dialect so specific, so rapid, and so filled with idiom that even standard Italian speakers struggled to keep up during business negotiations. "Please sit," Marcus Thorne said, bowing so low it was embarrassing. "Mr. Sterling, Mr. Moretti, welcome to the Gilded Lily." Arthur Sterling grunted, waving Marcus away. He sat heavily at the head of the table. He looked exhausted. His hand shook slightly as he reached for his napkin. This deal wasn't just business for him. It was survival. Sterling Industries was leveraged to the hilt. If Project Aurora failed, if the Italians didn't sign the shipping rights over, Sterling would be bankrupt by Christmas. "Let's begin." Sterling rumbled his voice like gravel. He looked at Chad, the translator. "Tell Mr. Moretti that I am honored he made the trip, and I am ready to discuss the terms of the Verona docks." Chad cleared his throat, puffing out his chest. He turned to Giovanni and spoke. "Senor Moretti," Chad began. Senor Sterling Felice, per Elena, standing 10 ft away in the shadows, with her water pitcher, almost dropped it. Chad had just used the informal tool, the equivalent of calling a billionaire dude, and he had translated shipping rights as boat. Giovanni Moretti's eyes narrowed. He looked at his associates. He said nothing. "What did he say?" Sterling asked, looking at Chad. "He is contemplating your warm welcome, sir." Chad lied, sweating slightly. Eleanor bit her lip. This was going to be a disaster, and she had to stand there and watch it happen. The first course arrived, a delicate scallop carpaccio with truffle oil. The tension at the table was thick enough to choke on. Arthur Sterling was trying to navigate the complexities of international maritime law through a boy who barely knew how to order a pizza in Rome. "Tell him," Sterling said, leaning forward, "that regarding the liability clause in Section 4, we are willing to absorb 40% of the risk if they grant us exclusivity on the northern route." Chad stared at Sterling. "Liability clause," he whispered. "Just translate it," Sterling barked. The old man was losing patience. His face was flushing a dangerous shade of red. Chad turned to the Italians, Sterling Sonoya de Lord. It was broken, clumsy Italian. It lacked nuance. But worse, Moretti leaned forward and fired back a rapid, aggressive response in broad, fast Venetian. Giovanni spoke for 20 seconds straight, his hands, moving his tone, insulting. He called Sterling a madman and referenced a specific legislative act from 1998 regarding maritime safety funds. The table went silent. All eyes turned to clear-as-throat Chad. Chad was pale. He looked like a deer in headlights. He had understood maybe 3 words: 60% risk and tonight. "Well," Sterling demanded, slamming his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. "What did he say?" Chad swallowed hard. He looked at Marcus, the manager, who was hovering nearby with a look of horror. Chad decided to improvise. He said that 60% is too high, sir, and he wants to know if the funds are ready tonight. It was a gross oversimplification. It missed the insult, the reference to the unmodernized ships, and the legal threat regarding the 1998 agreement. Sterling frowned. "Tell him the funds are in escrow, but I need his signature before I release a dime." Clear's throat. As the dinner progressed, the miscommunications piled up like unwashed dishes. Chad was drowning. He was missing key technical terms. When Giovanni asked about sovereign immunity waivers, Chad translated it as government permission. When Sterling spoke about capital expenditure caps, Chad translated it as spending money. The Italians were getting angry. They were whispering among themselves, casting disgusted looks at the food at the walls and mostly at Arthur Sterling. They felt disrespected. To them, Sterling had hired an idiot to mediate $1 billion merger. It was an insult to the House of Moretti. Elena moved silently around the table, refilling water glasses. Every time she leaned in, she heard the Italians mocking Sterling. One of the associates muttered. "This old man is incompetent," Giovanni replied quietly. "He doesn't even know what we are talking about." Elena's heart ached for Arthur. She saw the tremor in his hand. He wasn't incompetent. He was being sabotaged by his own hired help. She looked at Marcus, the manager. Marcus was busy texting on his phone near the kitchen, oblivious to the fact that the restaurant's biggest client was about to walk out. By the time the main course arrived, a rack of lamb, the deal was hanging by a thread. Then came the breaking point. Sterling, frustrated by the lack of progress, decided to play his ace card. "Tell him," Sterling said, his voice low and serious, "that I know about the debt his subsidiary is carrying in Zurich. Tell him I can make that go away if he signs the full exclusivity deal." It was a power move, a threat cloaked in an offer. Chad looked terrified. "Sir, I say it!" Sterling roared. Chad turned to Giovanni. He tried to translate subsidiary debt in Zurich. He fumbled. He used the wrong word for debt using culpa, which means guilt sin instead of debto. And he botched the tone completely. "Lui sadua culparigo laspar," to fear me, to Giovanni's ears. This didn't sound like a financial offer. It sounded like blackmail regarding a crime. "He knows about your sin in Zurich. He will make it disappear if you sign." The reaction was instantaneous. Giovanni Moretti's face went purple. He slammed his napkin onto the table. He stood up, his chair screeching against the floor like a dying animal. "Camosi!" Giovanni shouted, his voice echoing off the frescoed ceiling. Arthur Sterling looked confused. "What? What is he saying?" Chad was trembling. "I think he's upset." "Upset? He looks like he's going to kill me." Sterling stood up, leaning heavily on his cane. "Fix this. Tell him it's a financial offer." But Giovanni was already motioning to his team. "Ando sububito, non remaro un muto, deu in cutu." "Let's go immediately. I won't stay another minute in this circus." The Italians began to gather their briefcases. Marcus, the manager, finally looked up from his phone and came running over his face, pale. "Mr. Moretti, please dessert is coming the soul." Giovanni spat on the floor near Marcus's polished shoes. Arthur Sterling sank back into his chair. He looked suddenly very old and very frail. He dropped his head into his hands. It was over. Project Aurora was dead. The bank would call the loans on Monday. The sterling empire, built over 50 years, would be liquidated. The room was deadly silent, save for the shuffling of the Italians leaving. Elena stood by the service station. She looked at Arthur Sterling, a man defeated. She looked at the arrogant, confused translator. She looked at Marcus, who was about to lose his job, and likely blame her for it somehow. She took a breath. She shouldn't do this. She really, really shouldn't do this. She was a waitress. She needed this paycheck. But she also remembered her grandfather. She remembered the dignity of old men who had built the world with their hands. Elena set the water pitcher down on the service tray with a deliberate clink. She walked past Marcus. She walked past the trembling Chad. She stepped directly into the path of Giovanni Moretti, blocking his exit. Marcus gasped. "Cross. Get out of the way. Are you insane?" Giovanni stopped looking down at the waitress in the cheap uniform with disdain. "Move," he hissed in English. Elena didn't move. She looked Giovanni Moretti directly in the eyes. She straightened her back, dropping the slump of the tired waitress, assuming a posture that was regal, almost military. When she spoke, her voice was low, resonant, and perfectly controlled. And she didn't speak English, she said. "Mr. Moretti, please forgive the misunderstanding." The Italian was flawless, but it wasn't just Italian. She used the specific cadence of the Veneto region, the soft consonants, the musicality that only a native or a scholar would possess. Giovanni froze. The anger on his face flickered, replaced by confusion. He looked her up and down. "You speak our tongue." Elena nodded, maintaining eye contact, a direct violation of Marcus's rules. "Lingua malintento," she continued, her voice gathering strength, not just the language, but the intent. She turned her gaze to the terrified translator, then back to Giovanni. She switched effortlessly to financial terminology. She clarified that Sterling wasn't blackmailing him over a crime. He was offering to buy out the structural debt of Vivaldi Logistics, a specific subsidiary. The silence in the room now was different. It wasn't the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence of shock. Arthur Sterling lifted his head from his hands. He stared at the waitress, the girl he hadn't looked at, twice all night. "What is she saying?" he whispered, though he didn't dare interrupt. Giovanni's eyes narrowed, but the aggression was gone, replaced by calculating curiosity. "Side of Vivaldi Logistics?" he asked quietly. "And how do you know about Vivaldi Logistics? It was a secret account. It wasn't public knowledge." Elena hesitated for a fraction of a second. This was the danger zone. Clear's throat. If she revealed too much, she exposed herself. "Lego Financial Times." "Senor," she lied smoothly, though it was a lie that convinced no one. "Partnership. Mr. Sterling is a man of honor, but he is surrounded by fools. He offers to absorb the debt to free up your capital for expansion in Asia. It is an offer of partnership, not a threat." Giovanni looked at Arthur Sterling, then back at Eleanor. He slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket, a sign of relaxing. He turned to Sterling. "Is this true?" Giovanni asked in heavily accented English. "You want to pay the Vivaldi debt for Asia expansion?" Sterling, sharp as a tack, despite his age, realized the lifeline he had just been thrown. He didn't know what Vivaldi was, but he nodded vigorously. "Yes, exactly. To free up your capital for the partnership." Giovanni let out a long breath. He looked at Chad, the hired translator, with pure disgust. Then he looked at Elena with a strange expression. Respect mixed with suspicion. "Dodo," Giovanni said to Elena. "Medo ma solo." Agreed. "I will sit, but only if you translate." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't part of the plan. She just wanted to stop the walkout. Marcus, the manager, finally found his voice. He rushed forward, sweating. Mr. Moretti, surely not. She is just a waitress. She is uneducated. I will call another agency immediately. Giovanni didn't even look at Marcus. He raised a hand, silencing him. She speaks better Italian than you speak English. She stays. You go. Marcus looked like he had been slapped. He looked at Arthur Sterling for support. Sterling stared at Marcus. You heard him. Get out of my sight and take that idiot boy with you. Sterling pointed his cane at the empty chair next to him, the seat of honor at the billion-doll table. He looked at Elena. Sit down, my dear, the old billionaire said softly. It seems you are the only one here who knows what is going on. Elena looked at the chair. If she sat down, there was no going back. Her anonymity would be gone. Her hidden life in New York would be over. But looking at the desperation in the old man's eyes, she couldn't refuse. She untied her apron. She let it drop to the floor, right onto Marcus's polished shoes. Yes, sir, Elena said. She sat down, and the real negotiation began. The dynamics of the table had shifted tectonically. Where there was once confusion and hostility, there was now a razor-sharp focus. The air in the Gilded Lily hummed with the energy of billions of dollars moving across invisible borders. Elena sat straight-backed in the velvet chair, her cheap black uniform, a stark contrast to the brawny suits surrounding her. She didn't touch the wine glass the sommelier had nervously placed in front of her. Her mind was locked into the rhythm of the negotiation. Tell Mr. Moretti. Arthur Sterling said, his voice regaining the steel that had made him a titan of industry, that I cannot accept the lien on the dry docks in Genoa. If the Italian government changes the tax code next year, Sterling Industries would be left holding the bag for his pension liabilities. Elena turned to Giovanni. She didn't just translate. She filtered the aggression. She softened the blow while keeping the iron of the demand, her hands clasping the linen napkin in her lap. Mr. Sterling is worried about tax exposure in Genoa. He proposes shifting the collateral to the shipyards in Trieste. It is a safer asset for both. It protects your cash flow and reduces legal risk. Giovanni listened, his eyes closed as he swirled his Barola. He was testing her. Every few minutes he would throw in an obscure Venetian slang term or a hyper-specific reference to maritime salvage law, Article 14 of the London Convention, just to see if she would stumble. She never did. Trieste, Giovanni amused, opening his eyes. He looked at Sterling, then at Eleanor. He is a shark, this old man. He knows Trieste is undervalued, but he paused, a small smile touching his lips. It is acceptable if he agrees to the EBITDA multiplier of 12x instead of 10x. Eleanor turned to Sterling. He agrees to the Trieste swap. Mr. Sterling. But he wants a higher valuation on the earnings 12 times EBITDA. Sterling's eyes widened. He pulled a fountain pen from his pocket and scribbled on the tablecloth, a habit he had when he was excited. 12, that's steep. That's an extra 50 million. It is. Elena interjected softly, breaking her role as a mere conduit. But sir, if you secure the Trieste yards, you bypass the union tariffs in Naples. You save 70 million in the first 2 years alone. You come out ahead by 20 million. Sterling stopped writing. He looked at Elena slowly. The other executives at the table stared at her. A waitress wasn't supposed to know about union tariffs or EBDR multipliers. Who are you? Sterling whispered, genuine wonder in his voice. You aren't just a linguist. You understand the business. I listen, sir, Elena said, looking down. I've served many business dinners. One picks things up. No, Sterling shook his head. You don't pick up mezzanine financing structures by serving bread rolls. There is a brain behind those eyes. A sharp one. He turned to Giovanni. Done. 12x EBITDA. Trieste is ours. Giovanni laughed, a booming sound that startled the other diners. Ben bravo, signorina. For the next hour, Elena was the conductor of the symphony. She navigated through the murky waters of crossbar intellectual property, environmental compliance, and labor disputes. She caught a clause in page 40 of the contract that would have voided Sterling's insurance, a mistake the expensive lawyers had missed, and pointed it out discreetly. Sterling looked at her with a growing sense of awe. He had no children of his own. His only son had died years ago, leaving him with a company and no heir. In this young woman, he saw a spark he hadn't seen in decades. But while the table was celebrating the progress, a storm was brewing in the kitchen. Marcus Thorne was pacing back and forth near the dish pit, his face a mask of fury. He had been humiliated, ejected from his own VIP table, replaced by a nobody, a girl who scrubbed tables. "She's mocking me." Marcus, Clear's throat, hissed to the chef. "She's out there playing CEO while I stand here like a servant." "Let it go, Marcus," Chef Pierre grunted, plating a dessert. "The old man is happy. We get paid." "No," Marcus sneered. "Something is wrong. A waitress who speaks Venetian dialect, who knows about Swiss accounts. She's a fraud, or worse." Marcus pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. It was a private investigator he used to run background checks on new hires, mostly to find dirt he could use to leverage them into working double shifts. "Run a name for me," Marcus whispered into the phone, watching Eleanor through the porthole window of the kitchen door. Eleanor Cross, social security number ending in 890 "I want everything. Deep dive. I think she's a corporate spy using a fake identity. I think she's planted here to sabotage the merger." He listened for a moment. "Yes, rush it. I'll pay double." Marcus hung up. He smoothed his suit jacket. He walked back out to the floor, standing in the shadows, watching Elena laugh at something. Giovanni said, "Laugh while you can, darling," Marcus thought, "because I'm about to serve the final cause." The deal was practically done. Clear's throat. The lawyers were printing the final addendums on the portable printer they had brought. Dessert. A gold leaf chocolate tour was being served. Arthur Sterling looked 10 years younger. The weight of bankruptcy was lifted. "Javan," he said, raising his glass. "To the future and to the unexpected bridge between our worlds." He nodded to Eleanor. Eleanor smiled, but it was a tired smile. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the reality of her situation was settling in. Clear's throat had exposed herself. People would ask questions now. She needed to leave New York tonight. "Signorina," Giovanni said, leaning in, "you must work for me. Come to Venice. I will pay you triple what this restaurant pays you. I will pay you 10 times that." Sterling interrupted immediately. "Stay in New York. Be my executive assistant." "No, be my VP of International Relations." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. It was the life she should have had, the life that was stolen from her. I am honored, gentlemen." "Truly, but I cannot." "Why?" Sterling asked, frowning. Before she could answer, the double doors of the restaurant burst open. The room fell silent. Marcus Thorne walked in, but he wasn't alone. Flanking him were 2 uniformed NYPD officers and a man in a trench coat, holding a thick folder. They marched straight to the VIP table. "Is there a problem, officer?" Sterling asked, his voice cold. He hated interruptions. "I'm afraid there is, Mr. Dwart Sterling," Marcus said, his voice dripping with triumphant malice. He pointed a shaking finger at Eleanor. "This woman, the one sitting at your table, she is a fraud." Eleanor froze. Her hand gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "Marcus, have you lost your mind?" Sterling stood up, leaning on his cane. "Get out." "Listen to me, sir," Marcus pleaded, looking at the police. I ran a background check. The social security number she gave us, it belongs to a deceased woman from Ohio. Elena Cross doesn't exist." A gasp went through the room. Giovanni looked at Eleanor, his eyes narrowing. "She is an imposter," Marcus continued, emboldened. "I believe she is a corporate tool sent by your competitors, probably Russo Dynamics, to leak the details of this merger. She has been recording everything. Officer, search her bag." "Ma'am, please stand up," one of the officers said, stepping forward. "This is preposterous," Sterling roared. "She saved the deal or she manipulated it," Marcus countered. "Think about it, Mr. Sterling. How does a waitress know about Vivaldi Logistics? That's classified banking information. How does she know the specific dialect of Mr. Moretti's hometown? She's an operative. The logic was twisted, but effective." Doubt flickered in Arthur Sterling's eyes. He looked down at Eleanor. "Eleanor, is this true? Is your name not Eleanor Cross?" Eleanor slowly stood up. She looked at Marcus, who was grinning like a jackal. She looked at the police. "My name is not Elena Cross," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Aha!" Marcus shouted. "Arrest her corporate espionage identity theft. But I am not a Songay." Elena continued, turning to face Giovanni Moretti. She looked him dead in the eye. "And I did not learn about Vivaldi Logistics from a briefing dossier." Giovanni's face went pale. He recognized that tone. He recognized the tilt of her chin. It was a ghost from the past. "I know about Vivaldi Logistics," Elena said, her voice rising, filling the silent restaurant, "because that is the name of the shell company you used to bankrupt my father." The silence in the room was now absolute. Even the police officers paused, sensing that this was no longer a simple case of identity theft. "Your father," Giovanni whispered. "My name," she said, reaching up and pulling the hair tie from her hair, letting the chestnut waves fall over her shoulders, transforming her from the server to something else entirely, "is Elena Vance, daughter of Robert Vance, the man you and your partners destroyed in 2015. Arthur Sterling dropped his cane. It clattered loudly on the floor. "Robert Vance, the shipping magnate. He committed suicide. He was murdered." Elena Eleanor corrected her eyes, blazing with cold fire. "Murdered by shame. By the lies you told the press. By the embezzlement you framed him for. Embezzlement that was actually funneled into a secret account called Vivaldi." She turned to the man in the trench coat. "You have a folder?" "Good. I have one, too." She reached into her apron pocket, not for a notepad, but for a small, battered USB drive she had carried with her every day for 5 years. "Marcus is right about one thing," Elena said. "I have been waiting, but not to steal Sterling's secrets. I've been waiting for him," she pointed at Giovanni. "I knew eventually greed would bring you back to New York. I knew you would try to con Mr. Sterling just like you conned my father." Marcus looked confused. "Officer, arrest her." She admitted to using a fake name. "Shut up!" Sterling shouted at Marcus, a vein throbbing in his forehead. He looked at Elena. "Robert Vance was my friend. I turned my back on him because of the scandal. Are you telling me he was innocent?" "I can prove it," Elena said. "The Vivaldi account numbers, the transfer dates, they are all in my head. I memorized my father's ledgers before the bank seized our house. Why do you think I pushed for the structural debt clause tonight, Giovanni?" She smiled a terrifying, predatory smile. "Because by signing that contract 10 minutes ago, you didn't just merge with Sterling. You legally acknowledged the Vivaldi liabilities. You just admitted in writing that Vivaldi belongs to your holding company. You just confessed to the fraud that killed my father." Giovanni Moretti looked at the document in front of him. The ink was still wet. He realized with dawning horror that the waitress hadn't saved the deal. She had weaponized it. The atmosphere in the Gilded Lily shifted from a business dinner to a crime scene in the blink of an eye. Giovanni Moretti was a man who had faced mafia hitmen in Naples and hostile takeovers in London without blinking. But now, staring at the wet ink on the contract, his hands were trembling uncontrollably. He realized the trap had snapped shut, and the bait had been his own greed. He lunged across the table, his eyes wild. "Give me that paper!" he screamed, abandoning all pretense of civility. "It is a mistake. I rescind my signature." Arthur Sterling was faster than he looked. Despite his 82 years, he snatched the documents away, clutching the leather folio to his chest like a shield. Security. Sterling barked. Two large men in dark suits materialized from the shadows, stepping between the table and the enraged Italian. They didn't draw weapons, but their stance made it clear. "Move one more inch and you will regret it." "Hold on." Clear his throat. Sterling growled, his eyes darting between the contract and Elena Nena. The pieces were clicking together in his mind, the jagged, painful pieces of a decade-old puzzle. "You framed Robert. You stole $30 million from our joint venture 10 years ago and blamed it on him." "She is lying," Giovanni shouted, sweat pouring down his face, ruining his tan. He pointed a shaking finger at Elena Nena. "She is a waitress, a nobody. She is trying to confuse you to save her job." "I'm the CEO of nothing," Elena Nena said, stepping around the table. She moved with a predator's grace, no longer the invisible servant. She stood next to Sterling, forming Clear's throat, a united front. "I live in a studio apartment in Queens. I scrub floors for minimum wage. But I have the truth. And now, thanks to Mr. Sterling's lawyers, I have the paper trail." She turned to the man in the trench coat, the forensic accountant Marcus had foolishly summoned to expose her. "You have the folder Marcus asked for?" Elena Nena asked the man. "Open it. Look at the transaction history for the shell company Vivaldi Logistics in 2015. The accountant hesitated, then opened the file. It shows a series of transfers to an offshore account in the Caymans. The beneficiary is G. Moretti Holdings. The color drained from Giovanni's face completely. "Marcus is right about one thing," Eleanor said, her voice rising, filling the silent restaurant. "I have been waiting, but not to steal Sterling's secrets. I've been waiting for him." Clear's throat. She gestured to Giovanni. "I knew eventually greed would bring you back to New York. I knew you would try to con Mr. Sterling, just like you conned my father." Marcus Thorne, realizing his ship was sinking, tried to pivot. He rushed forward, his face pale. "Mr. Sterling, I had no idea I called the police to protect you. I was trying to save the company from a fraud." "A fraud?" Elena Nena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus, you called the police on the only person in this room who was actually trying to save Mr. Sterling from losing everything. You were so obsessed with humiliating me that you almost handed Sterling Industries over to a criminal. Officer, arrest her." Marcus shrieked, desperate to regain control. She admitted to using a fake name. "That's identity theft. Shut up!" Sterling roared. The sound was so loud that a glass on the table vibrated. Sterling turned his icy gaze on the manager. "You abused this young woman." Clear's throat. "You humiliated her. I watched you tonight, Marcus. I saw how you spoke to her. You tried to have her arrested to cover your own incompetence. But, sir, you are fired." Sterling said, his voice low and dangerous. "And I will personally ensure that if you so much as apply to manage a lemonade stand in this country, I will buy the stand just to fire you again. Get out of my sight." Marcus slumped, defeated. He looked at the kitchen doors where the staff cooks, bus boys, dishwashers were watching through the portholes with undisguised glee. He slinked away, disappearing into the back, his career in luxury hospitality over. But the danger wasn't over. Giovanni's bodyguards took a step forward. The air crackled with violence. The NYPD officers had their hands on their holsters, unsure of who to target. "I am leaving," Giovanni spat, buttoning his jacket. "And this contract is void. I was coerced. A waitress tricked me." "The contract, Sterling," said his voice booming, "is witnessed by a notary recorded on video security and signed in the presence of legal counsel. It is ironclad." Elena stepped forward, holding up a finger. "And Giovanni, you forget Clause 14, Section B, the debt assumption clause." Giovanni froze. By signing that document, Elena explained, her voice clinical and cold. "You didn't just agree to merge. You legally acknowledged that Vivaldi Logistics is a subsidiary of your holding company. You just claimed ownership of the debt, which means you just claimed ownership of the crime." She smiled a terrifying, brilliant smile. "You just signed your own confession." Giovanni looked at the exit. He looked at his guards. For a second, it looked like he might order a bloodbath. He was cornered, and cornered animals bite. Then Elena spoke one last time in Italian. Her voice softened, dropping the aggression, appealing to the one thing she knew Giovanni cared about more than money, his legacy. "Non farlo," she said softly. "Don't do it, Giovanni. If you fight now, your children will inherit only shame. You lost. End it with dignity. For the Moretti name." The mention of his children broke him. The fight went out of his eyes. His shoulders slumped. He waved his hand at his bodyguards to stand down. He sat back heavily in his chair, covering his face with his hands. "You are exactly like your father," he whispered. "Too smart for your own good." "My father was a good man," Elena replied. "You just didn't give him the chance to fight back. I took that chance for him." The police officers, finally understanding the situation, thanks to the forensic accountant, showing them the warrant on his tablet, moved in. "Mr. Moretti," the officer said, pulling out handcuffs, "we have a red notice from Interpol regarding the Vivaldi embezzlement case. We need you to come with us." As Giovanni was led away in handcuffs passing the stunned diners of the Gilded Lily, the silence in the room was heavy. The Titan of Venice had fallen, brought down by a girl in orthopedic shoes. Arthur Sterling turned to Elena. The adrenaline finally left her body. Her legs gave out and she wobbled. Sterling caught her. His grip was surprisingly strong for a man of his age. He guided her to a chair, not the servant stool, but a plush velvet armchair. "Robert Vance," Sterling said, his voice thick with emotion. He sat down opposite her, looking old and weary. "He called me, you know, before the end. He asked for a loan. He asked me to look at the books. I told him I couldn't be associated with an embezzler. I hung up on him." Sterling wiped a tear from his cheek. "I killed him just as much as Giovanni did. I failed, my friend." "You didn't know," Elena whispered, though her own heart was breaking. "Giovanni fooled the banks, the auditors, the government. He was a master of lies." "My father didn't blame you, Arthur. He blamed himself for trusting the wrong partner." "I can't bring him back," Sterling said, looking her in the eyes with a fierce determination. "I cannot undo the past, but I can restore his name. Tomorrow morning, every newspaper in New York will run the story of his innocence. I will spend every penny I have to clear the Vance record." He gestured to the chaotic table covered in wine stains and billion-dollar contracts. "But that is not enough. Sterling Industries needs a new VP of European operations. We need someone who speaks the language. Someone who understands that business is about people, not just numbers. Someone who can spot a liar from a mile away and trap them in their own net. Eleanor looked at the old man. She looked at her tired hands, roughened by years of bleach and hot water. She looked at the restaurant that had been her prison, now transformed into her stage. "I don't have a degree, Mr. Sterling," she said softly. "I couldn't afford to finish college after the assets were seized. I'm a college dropout with a waitressing resume. You just outmaneuvered the shrewdest shipping magnate in Europe." Sterling smiled, tapping his cane on the floor. "You secured a billion-dollar merger and cleared a federal fraud case in between serving breadsticks and refilling water. I think you've passed the entrance exam, Miss Vance." He offered her his arm. "Now, shall we order some fresh champagne? Real champagne, not the house wine. I believe we have a merger to celebrate, and I want to hear everything about your father. I want to remember him properly." Eleanor stood up. She untied her apron for the last time, letting it fall to the floor where Marcus had stood. She took the arm of the billionaire. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel like a ghost haunting the edges of the wealthy. She felt like she belonged. "Yes, sir," she said, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "I would like that very much." The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot, echoing through the mahogany-paneled walls of the Southern District of New York's federal courthouse. "Giovanni Moretti," the judge announced, his voice devoid of sympathy, on the counts of wire fraud, international money laundering, and the falsification of corporate liabilities regarding the Vivaldi Logistics Shell Company. "This court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." The courtroom erupted. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and the sketch artists scribbled furiously. Giovanni Moretti. Once the Lion of Venice looked small and withered in his orange jumpsuit. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at the back of the courtroom, where a young woman sat in the front row, dressed in a cream-colored suit that cost more than her old annual salary. Elena Vance held the gaze of the man who had destroyed her family. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded, a gesture of finality. The debt was paid. Beside her, Arthur Sterling patted her hand. "It is done, my dear." Clear as throat, he whispered. "The headlines tomorrow will read. Robert Vance exonerated. Moretti exposed." Eleanor took a deep breath, the air finally tasting sweet after 5 years of ash. "Thank you, Arthur, for everything. Don't thank me." The old billionaire chuckled, leaning on his new cane, a gift from Elena made of polished ebony with a silver handle. "You're the one who tripled our stock price in the last quarter. The board is terrified of you. I love it." They walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding sunlight of Foley Square. A swarm of microphones was thrust into their faces. "Ms. Vance? Ms. Advance? Is it true you're taking over as CEO of the European division?" Clear's throat. "Mr. Sterling, will Sterling Industries be acquiring the Moretti assets?" Elena stepped up to the podium. She looked into the camera lenses, knowing that somewhere in a cheap apartment or a break room, people were watching. "Sterling Industries did not acquire the Moretti assets," Elena said, her voice steady and commanding. "We reclaimed stolen property, and as of this morning, the board has approved the creation of the Robert Vance Scholarship Fund. We are endowing $10 million to help children of working-class families, waitresses, janitors, laborers attend university. Because brilliance doesn't only come from boardrooms. Sometimes it's pouring your water." She turned and walked toward the waiting limousine, ignoring the shouted questions. The car ride back to the Sterling Tower was quiet. Elena looked out the window at the city that had once chewed her up. Now she owned it. But there was one last loose end. "Driver," Elena said, "pull over here, 5th Avenue and 42nd. We have the strategy meeting, Ms. Vance." The driver noted. "It can wait 5 minutes. I'm hungry." Arthur looked at her confused. "You want a hot dog?" "No," Elena smiled. "I want a coffee from that cart." She pointed to a generic coffee cart parked on the corner, struggling against the cold wind. A man in a stained green apron was frantically trying to fix a leaking urn while a line of impatient customers yelled at him. Elena stepped out of the limo. Her heels clicked on the pavement. She walked up to the cart. The man in the apron looked up, sweat dripping down his forehead despite the cold. He looked haggarded. His eyes were sunken, his hair thinning. "1 black coffee, please," Elena said. The man froze. The plastic cup slipped from his hand and bounced on the sidewalk. "M. Vance," Marcus Thorne stammered. "The former manager of the Gilded Lily looks like a ghost of his former arrogant self. No Italian suits, no cufflinks, just a minimum wage apron and the smell of burnt beans." "Hello, Marcus," Elena said pleasantly. "How is the service industry treating you?" I... Marcus swallowed hard. He looked at the limousine behind her. He looked at the security detail standing discreetly nearby. "I've been applying everywhere." "But Mr. Sterling, he blacklisted me everywhere. Even the dive bars won't hire me. This cart is my cousin's." "It's a hard job," Elena said, looking him up and down. "Standing on your feet all day, rude customers, managers screaming at you for things out of your control. It hurts the feet, doesn't it?" Marcus looked down at his cheap sneakers. "Yes, it does. Karma is a funny thing, Marcus. It serves everyone eventually, just like a waiter." Elena placed a $100 bill in his tip jar. "Keep the coffee and try to be nicer to the next person in line. You never know who they might be." She turned and walked away. She didn't look back to see him staring after her, clutching the counter, realizing the magnitude of the mistake he had made simply by being cruel to someone he deemed beneath him. Back in the office, the view from the 80th floor was spectacular. The sun was setting, painting New York in gold and violet. Arthur Sterling sat at the head of the massive conference table. The executives were already assembled, men and women who had gone to Ivy League schools, who had never worried about rent in their lives. When Elena walked in, the room went silent. They didn't stand because she was a woman. They stood because she was the most formidable intellect in the room. "Please sit," Elena said, taking the chair at the right hand of the CEO. She opened the folder in front of her. It was labeled Project Aurora Phase 2. "Gentlemen," Elena began, her voice ringing with the same confidence she had used to silence Giovanni Moretti in the restaurant. "We have work to do. The Asian markets are opening, and I see a discrepancy in the logistics chain in Shanghai. But before we begin..." She paused. She looked at the water picture in the center of the table. She reached out and poured a glass for Arthur Sterling, then one for herself. "Never forget where you came from," she murmured to herself. She took a sip of water. "Now," Elena Vance said, smiling at her team, "let's make $1 billion." And that is the story of how Elena Vance went from invisible to invincible. It's a powerful reminder that the person pouring your coffee or cleaning your office might just be the smartest person in the room. Marcus clears throat. Thorne learned the hard way that arrogance is a debt that always comes due, while Arthur Sterling proved that true leadership means recognizing talent, no matter what uniform it's wearing. Justice was served not just for Elena, but for her father, proving that the truth, like a diamond, cannot be buried forever. What do you think? Would you have forgiven Marcus, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of drama, revenge, and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next.